It was 1969. Man was on the moon, the gays were rioting at Stonewall, and mole people were infesting my sandbox. I was 5 years old at the time, and I was deathly afraid to even go outside. There were monstrous things out there lurking just underneath the ground, waiting to snatch me down below. I knew because I had seen the evidence. That evidence was a film, The Mole People, a black and white 1956 monster movie from Universal Studios. There were these things that lived underground, scaly, humpbacked, with clawed hands. They rose up through the earth and dragged people back down into the dark. My older siblings had it on one Saturday night, watching Channel 12's Shock Theater from Augusta, Georgia, The Late Show. Nobody noticed I was also in the room. Nobody thought to check. I ended up having nightmares about it for weeks, and because of that movie, my sandbox became a no-go zone. I refused to even play outside for a while. Mole people were everywhere out there. I'll be in my room, thank you. That was the arrangement. Now, The Mole People is not a good film. It's men in rubber suits with novelty claw hands emerging from holes in the ground while the other actors try not to laugh. I know that now. But at 5, I took it as a documentary. Here's what that film did to me. Once I got over my initial fears, I became obsessed with monsters. I learned all I could about them. I guess I'm what's known as a monster kid. One of those kids who grew up obsessed with classic horror movies in the 60s and 70s. I lived for syndicated Universal horror movies, and I absolutely adored Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. In my quest to conquer my monsters, I learned how they were made and how horror movies work. I taught myself about makeup and costuming. I learned stagecraft, and eventually I spent a good part of my young adult life inside a haunted attraction in Atlanta, Georgia, dressed as a monster, frightening strangers for money most every night in October. Not bad for a scared little kid that finally escaped from sandbox hell. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's an origin story. And it's also the second episode of this show. If you've had your own battles with mole people, then you're probably exactly who this show is for. My name is Baz Bishop, and this is Baz to the Bone. Let me tell you what this show is. Baz to the Bone is a horror and cult film podcast. Specifically, and this is the part that matters, it's about the places where horror and queer culture have always overlapped, which is pretty much everywhere once you start looking. I grew up in a little town called Allendale in the low country of South Carolina. The kind of place where the things that scared you and the things that shamed you were often the same. And nobody talked about either one all that much. Horror made a particular kind of sense to me from a very early age. I couldn't have told you why at the time, but I have some theories now. And we're going to spend about 30 episodes or so working through them. By trade, I'm a graphic designer. 20 years in print advertising, which is a long time to spend making things look like other things. I've also been an actor, a makeup artist, a writer. I even put on drag shows to raise money for AIDS charities back in the day. And at various points in my life, I have indeed been a monster. The technical term apparently is scareactor. That is, someone saw fit to pay me actual money to dress as a monster and frighten people. Over the course of a decade at Netherworld Haunted House in Atlanta, Georgia, a world-class attraction that deserves its own episode, I learned what actually scares people and why. And I learned it from the monsters side of the equation, which gives you a particular perspective. And then, and this is the part that I truly love, my first acting job when I moved to Los Angeles was playing a chainsaw clown named Stitches at Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights. The same studio that made The Mole People. Different rubber suit. I even got to join the union, the American Guild of Variety Artists. the Union for Live Variety Performers, which it turns out includes chainsaw clowns. I love saying that sentence. I will say it every chance I get. I spent most of my adult life in two different worlds that other people don't often think of as related: the horror world and the queer community. The bear and leather community specifically, which is its own thing, and we'll definitely get into it. This show is what happens when you stop treating all of this as any sort of coincidence. So that's the show, and here's why it exists. Here's the argument, the one I'm going to make in different ways for however long this show runs. The monster is always the outsider. Always. In every horror film worth talking about, the thing that frightens everybody else is the thing that doesn't fit. The wrong body, the wrong desires, the wrong place in the social order. The thing that was supposed to stay in the dark, but had the audacity not to. Sound familiar? And I'm not being clever about it. I'm not saying horror is sort of like being gay, as if that's some cute observation I had. I'm saying queer people have been watching horror for 100 years and feeling something that straight audiences weren't required to feel. Because the monster was us. The outsider was us. The thing was us. And horror was the only genre that looked us in the eye and said, yeah, but what if you were also terrifying? That's not victimhood. That's power. And it's a significant part of why queer audiences have always disproportionately loved horror. We recognize something. Now, I want to be careful here because this argument can tip into something too comfortable if you're not paying attention. It's given us representation and then punished us for it in the same frame. We're going to look at all that honestly. The good, the bad, and the films that manage to be both simultaneously, which is most of them. That's what makes it interesting. So let me tell you about some films. The Mole People. You already know what it did to me. The sandbox, the backyard, the provisional nature of the ground. It's the second episode of this show. Bride of Frankenstein, James Whale's classic from 1935. A scientist creates a monster. The monster wants a mate. And the whole thing is so openly, defiantly queer that it's remarkable Universal even let it out the door. Whale was an unapologetically gay man, by the standards of 1930s Hollywood, making a film about outsiders, about creation, about the body that doesn't belong, about the loneliness of being something the world has decided is wrong. Shifting gears from film to TV, we'll also do a deep dive into Dark Shadows. Not the film or the reboot, but the original television soap opera. It ran from 1966 to 1971 for nearly 1,200 episodes. It had one of the most devoted cult audiences in the history of American TV, and I was smitten by its quirky cast of hunky monsters, including Barnabas Collins, the cursed vampire, and the oh-so-dreamy Quentin Collins, the werewolf. I identified with the lonely, romantic, damned figures who could never just be normal. They were characters I recognized. I didn't have a word for it at the time, but I had feelings for them. I'll do a full episode on Dark Shadows. Probably two. Phantom of the Paradise, Brian De Palma, 1974. My sister took me to see this at the Palmetto Theater in Hampton, South Carolina. We had to drive 15 miles to see the movies back then. It was rated PG, but I was probably too young to be seeing it. A disfigured composer cheated out of his life's work, his face destroyed in a record press, haunting a rock venue in a mask, while the woman he loves is used and exploited by the man who stole everything from him. It is operatic and absurd and completely, utterly sincere. It is one of the most queer films Hollywood ever produced without once announcing the fact. I was too young to get it, but I got it. Next up, The Hunger from 1983 by director Tony Scott. In The Hunger, David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve are vampires. Susan Sarandon is a scientist drawn into their orbit. The most erotic film about death and aging I have ever seen. and I have seen a lot of films about death and aging. The desires run in every direction, between women, between men, across centuries. It is relentlessly, unapologetically queer in a way that most films from 1983 absolutely were not. And lastly, we have Nightbreed by Clive Barker in 1990. The monsters here are the sympathetic outsiders. The normal people, specifically the psychiatrists with a badge and a grudge, are the real monsters. It flopped on release, the studio cut it, and it still found one of the most devoted cult audiences of any film from that decade, because the people who needed it found it anyway. That tends to happen with films like these. These are just some of the films we're going to be spending some time with. There will be others. Some of them you'll probably know. Some of them I'm sure you've never heard of. All of them have something in them that doesn't get talked about loudly enough. Let me tell you about the first time I truly understood what this show is about. I was in a movie theater in my college days. I'd just started coming out of the closet. I was wearing black lingerie, tattered fishnets, and some size 15 triple E heels. I was surrounded by fellow freaks, and I mean that with complete affection, because I was absolutely one of them. The film was the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and the theater was rowdy and ridiculous and completely, utterly alive. Rocky Horror is not strictly a horror film. It's horror and camp and musical theater and science fiction, and a fairly comprehensive argument that the rules don't apply if you're having this much fun. It sits at that odd conjunction where genre stops making sense and something more honest takes over. And in that theater, in those heels, something clicked into place that I've been trying to articulate ever since. The refrain from the finale, "Don't dream it, be it," became kind of a mantra for me. Not just about the film, but about everything. About what it meant to be in a room full of people who had also decided that the version of themselves the world expected was not the version they were going to perform. Some 40 years later, in my heart, I'm still walking out of that theater in fishnets and heels. And the world outside that theater, then and now, still has its share of horrors. Growing up queer means growing up alert. You develop an instinct for your environment. Who's watching? What's safe? What isn't? You learn to read rooms. You learn to track threat. You learn very quickly that the world contains things that want to hurt you, and that those things often look perfectly normal. Horror, as a genre, is fundamentally about that experience. The monster in the house, the threat that was there all along, the thing wearing a friendly face. Gay people have been living in that reality for a long time. Long enough that horror stopped feeling like escapism and started feeling like recognition. The monster doesn't scare us the same way it scares everyone else. We've already met him. Sometimes he looked like a relative. Sometimes he looked like a neighbor. Sometimes he even wore a clerical collar. But here's the thing about a room full of freaks and fishnets. Nobody in that theater was afraid. Or if they were afraid together, which turns out to be a completely different thing. Queer audiences have always known that. Horror has always known that. It's one of the reasons they found each other. Everybody listening to this show has a version of this story, the film that got inside them, the monster they identified with, the final girl they wanted to be, or wanted to be with, depending on the film and depending on the evening. This show is that conversation given a structure and a microphone. I should tell you that this show is also going to spend some time in specific corners of queer culture. Not just the broad strokes, the communities I've actually lived in, the ones where I found family. I've been a part of both the bear community and the leather community for a long time. And if those terms are new to you, don't worry. We'll get there. But I want to plant the flag now because this show is also from those communities, and I'm not being subtle about it. Bears, loosely, are gay and bisexual men who identify with a body type and aesthetic that mainstream gay culture spent decades telling them wasn't desirable. Bigger bodies, body hair, a physical presence that a certain kind of gay magazine treated as either invisible or a problem to be solved. The community formed partly as a response to that, as a way of saying, no, actually, this is fine. More than fine. This is something. In 1993, I posed nude in an adult publication called Bear Magazine in San Francisco. I was even on the cover, and it was the single most body-positive thing I have ever done in my life. I've noticed that bears as a group tend to over-index on horror. They understand the outsider position from a lived experience. The body that doesn't match what the world expects, the desire that doesn't fit the approved template. They tend to have a dark humor about the gap between who they are and what they were supposed to be. That humor is not accidental. It's what happens when you spend enough time being told you're wrong and eventually decide to find it funny instead. The outsider body and the monster body are related ideas. There's a whole episode in that. Nightbreed is in that episode. And here's the thing. The reasoning behind this podcast is not entirely unrelated to all of this. I was sitting in the Atlanta Eagle one night, leather bar, Atlanta, good people, strong drinks, and I was complaining loudly about the lack of coverage of the bear and leather communities in the local gay press. Someone at the table looked at me and said, "Stop complaining and write it yourself." So I did. I became a columnist for the Midtown Times and wrote a community events column called Bear's Claws. Now I find I have the same impulses and the same reasoning. Aren't happening anywhere I can find them. So here we are. I've spent my life finding family in the wrong rooms, according to everyone else. Turns out that the wrong rooms were the right ones all along. Let me tell you what kind of show this is, so there are no surprises later. This is a show where I'll rattle on at length about Bride of Frankenstein as a queer text, and then a few episodes later spend an equal amount of time on Horror of Party Beach, which is a 1964 film about nuclear monsters who attack a beach party, all with the same level of complete sincerity. Both deserve it. The fact that one's a masterpiece and the other is a beautiful disaster is interesting to me, not a problem to be managed. And since we're on the subject of beautiful disasters, I should mention that I was once in an independent horror film myself called Zombeak. It was later released here in the UK for reasons that would become apparent as The Devil's Cock. The character I played was called Samuel, a psychotic man-child in a devil mask who spoke exclusively in a child's voice. Spoiler alert! In the film, I get killed by a satanically possessed chicken. I can only hope I brought a quiet dignity to the role. The point is, I'm not approaching this material from a position of comfortable distance. I've been inside a haunted house in a monster costume for 9 hours at a stretch. I've applied theatrical makeup in a parking lot at midnight. I've been killed on camera by a satanically possessed chicken. I have skin in this game. Literally in some cases. This is a show with opinions. No hot takes for the algorithm, but actual opinions. Argued out, with evidence, with the acknowledgement that I will sometimes be wrong. And I expect to hear about it when I am. This is not an academic podcast by any means. I've done the reading, I have the background, but I'm going to talk like a person and not write like a paper. The analysis serves the conversation, not the other way around. This is not a show that only covers films that got it right. Horror has a complicated relationship with queerness, and we're going to look at the relationship honestly. The films that gave us space, the films that punished us for occupying it, and the films that somehow managed to do both in the same scene. I'm not interested in a curated canon of correct films. That's a different show. And this is not a show that takes itself so seriously that it forgets to be fun. Frankenhooker is on the episode list. Clue is on the episode list. And if you came here expecting a very serious podcast about very serious films, you may have slightly misjudged the room. If all that sounds good to you, then please stay tuned. And welcome to Baths to the Bone. Here's a taste of what's ahead. Next episode, the mole people and the traumatized kid who wouldn't go outside for weeks afterwards. And what that scared kid became. It's an origin story. It's mine, and I've never told it properly before. Night of the Living Dead and what Romero did in 1968 by putting a black man at the center of a horror film and letting him be the only one who knows what to do. And just what that film meant to a kid growing up in a town that was still figuring out integration in the 1970s. The Exorcist. The summer I hit puberty and puberty hit back. I'll say no more than that. An episode whose title I'm not going to say just yet. Price, Lee, Nashi, Saxon. You'll understand when you hear it. And of course, Horror of Party Beach. I told you it was coming, and I meant it. The full list runs to 30 episodes and counting. I have opinions about all of them. This show will run for as long as the material demands. And at current count, that's going to be a while. I hope you'll stick around. Here's the thing I probably should have said right at the top. I've been threatening to make this show for years now. I'm in my 60s, so if not now, then when? The reason I didn't make it earlier is not interesting. It's the same reason most people don't do the thing they've been meaning to do. I was waiting for the right time. Well, episodes don't record themselves. I should tell you where I'm sitting, by the way, because it's mildly absurd and I think you should know. I'm a gay man from Allendale, South Carolina. Population when I was growing up, somewhere around 5,000 people. Baptist churches on every corner. A downtown that was already starting to empty out when I was a child. I currently live in Cardiff, Wales, in the United Kingdom, about as far from Allendale, South Carolina as you can get without leaving the planet. I got here through a combination of choices and circumstances that would take another podcast to explain. My husband's here on a global talent visa. I'm his +1. The weather is exactly what you'd imagine, and I have never once regretted any of it. That being said, I want this show to give you a frame for films you already love, introduce you to films you've never encountered, and make you feel like someone else understands the specific, slightly embarrassing depth of your obsession with a genre that some folks still treat as disposable. You in the back? I see you, ma'am. This show is dedicated to all us freaks that were born in the dark and never left it. Before I go, a few practical things. I'll be dropping new episodes every 2 weeks. That's the plan, and I intend to keep it up. Episodes may vary in length. Each one will take as long as the subject takes. I'm not padding them out, and I'm not cutting them short to fit a format. The show is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else podcasts live. Check out the show notes for the links. Also, there's a Patreon if you want to support the podcast directly. Early access, extended cuts, your name in the credits if that's something you want. Also in the show notes. You can find me on all the platforms as Baz to the Bone Cast. That would be Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, YouTube, Facebook, Threads, Grindr. On X, I'm Baz Bishop Cast, because X has a character limit, and I'm not shortening my name for a platform that can't count to 16. If you have something to say, a film I should cover, an argument I got wrong, a personal connection to any of this, I'd love to hear it. Drop me a line at baztothebonepod@icloud.com. I'm heading out to the sandbox now. Got some dirt to dig up on the mole people. If I'm not back in 2 weeks, I've been abducted and am waiting to be sacrificed to the Eye of Ishtar. Wish me luck. I'm Baz Bishop, and this has been Baz to the Bone.